We are going to do things a little bit differently tonight. Usually we only have one speaker, but tonight we are, well, it's a pleasure to have three speakers on tonight, and I will be introducing them by turn. And then at the end of the third talk, of Melissa's talk, we will be having a question and answer session with all of our speakers. So it's an absolute pleasure to welcome everyone to tonight's talk, Keeping the Wild Coast Wild. And our first speaker for tonight, Sinegugu Zikulu. So just as an introduction before Sinegugu starts, Sinegugu was born on the Pondoland Wild Coast. He is a champion of bottom-up, locally induced human scale development that will benefit local people. He has many years of standing up for the rights of rural communities affected by extractive industries. Sinegugu has 13 years of geography training. He has 2 academic degrees and a Master's of Philosophy in Environmental Management done through Stellenbosch University. He's authored more than 10 books, of which the latest is The Medical and Charmed Plants of Pondoland. He was nominated one of the top 7 2015 South African Conservationists of the Year, and he has won the Ecological Eco Warrior category Environmental Award for his activist work in 2019. He's also won the 2019 MEC Lilizela Award for Ecotourism Development in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa. He is among the top African indigenous peoples conservation leaders in negotiations, and he is joining us all the way from Margate. It is an absolute pleasure to have you, sir. Welcome. The screen and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Aaron, for the kind introduction. Yes, we can, and good evening to all the viewers at home. It's a pleasure to be here. Please, we can move into the next slide. Yeah, you can. Yes, okay. Okay, what I would like to to start off by talking to you about what the meaning of land to the people in Bonnerland, that is, as indigenous people in Bonnerland. So our belief as indigenous people is that the land owns us. In other words, we belong to the land. The land, we are born of the land. The land gives birth to us. And what happens is that when babies are born, the umbilical cord, when it falls off, is either buried inside the main heart, so they will dig a hole and bury it there, or it is taken to the kraal. And that is done to symbolically to show the connection to the land, or is thrown into the kraal in order to ensure that as people grow up, they go away and work everywhere, but they must always come back home. But also the land is the source of food. So we're born of the land, and then the umbilical cord being buried on the ground, symbolically that we're still connected to the land. And the land therefore gives us food because we grow all our food in the land. But also when we are sick, we get our medicine again from the land. But also the land is also gives us certain sites and plants that we use. In other words, the land knows us. There are sacred sites where all the cultures and rituals and all of that are done. So in other words, the land. And when we die, if we click just once and even twice, when we die, the land also will take us back. In other words, we get buried back onto the land. So that connection, as a result, we believe that the land, there is no price tag that you could put onto the land. So land, we live on communal land, the land under the traditional leadership system. We believe there is no value that you can equate to the land, because whatever amount of money which you, or whatever price tag you put onto the land, the money will be used up, but the land will actually live forever. It was a beautiful quotation as well from one of the elders and the veterans of the struggle to protect land in Bonoland, Samson Gambe, who said, money will be used up and the land will remain forever. So therefore, where do people get the sense that they can actually sell land? There's no value that would be equal to that of the land. Next slide, please. All right, and then if we're looking into the ocean as well, if we are looking at if we're looking at the attributes, in other words, why is the land of the wild coast, well, what's so special about this? Just to give you a few attributes to the land. So our area, which is within the coastal area, in particular the area between Port St. John's and KwaZulu-Natal, we have, in terms of geology, what we call the Nzigaba Sandstone Formation, and that forms the basis of what we call the Pondoland Center of Endemism. In other words, we have about 200 endemic plants that grow only in our area. And therefore, because of those special plants, and this center of endemism is confined to the coastline, and it's one of the smallest, it's one of the 34 biodiversity hotspots globally. And in South Africa, we've got 3 of those, including the Flores Kingdom, your fynbos, and also your Namaqualand daisies region there. So in terms of also the Pondoland coastline is a very significant archaeological site. So the Pondoland coastline, if you are looking into the ocean, we have globally one of the narrowest continental shelf. So why? Because when the ocean, the sea level went out, the coastal areas got uplifted due to the upwelling of magma. And then hence, for those of you who know the wild coast, they know that if you look at the waterfall bluff area, you've got all of those cliffs there, but also you've got a really higher lying areas very close to the coastline. And because of that, when after the last ice age, when the land was actually re-flooded, in other words, forming what we call the continental shelf, only a very narrow, about 15 to 20 kilometers of our coastline in Pondoland was re-flooded, whilst in other places, such as further down near Mossel Bay, the re-flooding occurred in a region between 50 to 100 kilometers. So therefore, the Pondoland coastline, because what was flooded is a very narrow continental shelf, so we have evidence of sites that were occupied throughout during the glacial maxima. So which makes it a very globally, we are housing sites where you could find the evidence of habitation throughout during the glacial maximum, which is about 24,000 to about 12,000 years ago. So therefore, most of those places, those who know this coastline, most of the shelters or the caves, and like a waterfall bluff cave, they have the evidence of that. And there's been a recent excavation done in the past 2-3 years, and they found amazing evidence which cannot be found anywhere else. So geology, I've mentioned the sandstone formation in our coastline, which stretch between Port St. John's and Hiberton, and also a unique culture, but also our coastline is also an MPA, marine protected area. So making it, again, our area very special. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then, so if we're looking at the ocean, for instance, part of the reason why we are opposed as coastal communities, we are opposed to the seismic exploration by Shell and many other companies, is because we've got spiritual connection. When people are training to become sangomas, which means the traditional healers and traditional doctors in our culture, some of the rituals are done at the ocean on the beachfront. And that happens because our belief is that the ancient ancestors, the ancestors, they travel on a journey from the land towards the ocean through rivers and natural pools, and they end up in the ocean. So the most ancient of our ancestors who know all our indigenous knowledge are in the ocean. So for the wisdom for Sangomas traditional healers, they have to go to the ocean. Some of the African independent churches as well, they also do their baptismal on the beach. Those who live closer to big cities, they often see them, that they go there very early, and all of the rituals done there, they are done very early by sunrise. They would almost be done again for the sacredness. So the ocean seawater, again, people often see the people collecting seawater. You often, when you go to the beach, you see people carrying containers. It is because of the sacredness of the seawater. So in terms of livelihoods, we collect a whole lot of marine living resources like your limpets, your fish, your crayfish, oysters, etc. So in other words, the ocean is both sacred and is also the source of livelihood. So for instance, we have always grown up knowing that it is not allowed for you to use beef when going fishing. And our belief is that if you use beef as a bait when you go fishing, you will pull out a mermaid. So that's all about the respect that we afford to the ocean. There are lots of things of the do's and don'ts, things that we are not allowed to do. So therefore, if Shell was to be allowed to go ahead and to explore for oil and find oil and drill for oil, that means all of these things, which are very dear to us as indigenous people of the Wild Coast, they would be gone, because the chances of the ocean being polluted, they are very high. Next slide, please. So of course, for recreational uses, that's just to show you some pictures that show you the Mpono culture. Can just that's what our dress code is, indigenous people, and that's how the women do their hair. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so most of the caves within the coastal area, they are full of shell middens. These are the caves which some of them being 10 k's away from the high water mark, but they are full of evidence, broken clay pots, Stone Age tools, shell middens. So because those were occupied by the people during the last ice age, what people normally refer to as strandlockers. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to show you the red desert, which you see to the right, and that's the Panyana River in my community. So to the left there, that's the red desert. And those red deserts, they are laden as well with Stone Age tools, broken clay pots, shell middens, again, an evidence. Some of the research done by Wits University, Dr. Kathy Kuman, who's retired now, showed that some of the Stone Age tools there depict evidence of habitation between 300,000 to 500,000 years ago. Next one. Next slide, please. And then these are some of the Stone Age tools which are found in those archaeological sites that I've shown you. So we find those, so they are heritage sites. And it's sad to also know that these are the sites that are being targeted by our Minister of Minerals for mining at Kolobeni. These Stone Age tools are taken from that red desert you saw in the previous slide. And that's the area, the number one target area that they want to mine. And it's a heritage site, and by law, they are not allowed to do that. Next slide, please. That shows you one of the beautiful rivers within the coastal reaches of the Wild Coast. The next one. The next slide, please.
It's on the next slide.
Okay, all right,
Order.
yes, yeah, yes, yeah, that's just showing you. You can click on the next one. I just, do I still have a minute?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes. Oh, okay, yes. So the other thing I've told you about the very special plants is that there are about 200 endemic plants which are found there, with some of them being trees, some being the grasslands plants, some beautiful plants like you can mention a few like your Oryzomopsis subansophylla, your Eugenia albanensis, your Gibiosis cafra. There are lots of these beautiful endemic plants that can only be found in Bonaland and not anywhere else in the world. The next slide, please. That's showing you. And also, those who have been to the Wild Coast, of course, they know that one of the common sites is finding the cows in the beach in the Wild Coast. Next slide, please. Okay. All right. I am in closing. I would like to say, it is for that. It is that connection to our land, and also I think a discussion for some other day in terms of how over these past few centuries we have actually, as Amambona people, as the people of Mbondaland in the Wild Coast, we have stood up and to protect the land over the years. There are lots of that which we can. So, and you people know that at Kolobeni, again, where the Australian mining company wants to mine, for the past two decades, the people of Amadiba, my community, people have been standing up again to challenge the government. They have taken government to court, and one of the landmark cases where we went to High Court and asking for a declaration for a right to say no, which we won. Against, of course, the government wasn't happy, and it was Mandashi. He tried to appeal. So we have this long-standing history as the people of Bonaland to protect our land because of knowing what the land means to us and to our livelihood. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker, I have had the privilege of meeting, or actually we just spoke over the phone, Simon. But Dr. Simon Elwen, born and raised in South Africa. He's always loved the sea and animals, and after graduating as a biologist, he had the privilege, as he states, to travel and work in several other countries, including the UK and Gabon. Most of his work since his PhD has been in Namibia, running the Namibia Dolphin Project. Most recently, he moved back to Cape Town to set up Sea Search as a base of operations to make it easier to expand his research within South Africa. Although he's interested in all aspects of the ocean, he's particularly interested in the behavioral adaptations of the cetaceans that they make to different environmental conditions. This is an important line of research these days due to the increasing number of changes that have occurred in the marine realm from human impacts. Simon, it's an absolute pleasure to have you. The screen is all yours.
Great, thanks, Ruan. I hope you guys can all hear me okay. This is a bit of an unusual
loud and clear
talk for me, I guess. And I'm used to sort of talking about my own work and as a scientist, maybe unusual scientist, but I do get a little bit uncomfortable and cautious when I'm outside my immediate field of work. But I think, and I hope I can provide a useful insight into this field, into this discussion. Because as a biologist, I've worked on the impact of sound and the impact of human activities on marine mammals particularly, but then I've also worked on the seismic, on a seismic vessel, and I've also been involved in quite a few of the impact assessments involved in it. So I think I have a fairly balanced view of what is possible. So there's been a lot of media about this, about the Shell 7, the Shell Seismic 7 in the Transkei recently, and there's big cries for help. All the whales and dolphins are going to die. There's been some really brilliant marketing coming out of it. It's a very emotive image that was doing the rounds. As a scientist, I found this image quite frustrating. Actually, graphic design-wise, 10 out of 10, but from a honesty and accuracy point of view, maybe 1 out of 10. There is currently, despite many years of seismic surveys, there are no real confirmed cases of mass stranding in response to seismic surveys. 1 or 2 possibilities, but really it's not, there's not a strong evidence, not in comparison to something like naval sonar, where the evidence is abundantly clear. And pretty much every time the Navy start using something like frequency sonar, we end up with a load of dead animals. So I get frustrated with it, sort of the dishonesty of some of the marketing. I understand why things get exaggerated, but Shell aren't going to kill whales and dolphins necessarily, or any of the other seismic companies, because we're going to kill a lot of them by hitting them with ships, I'm afraid. Maybe even chopping them in half with ships. We're entangling a lot of whales. The British whale trapped in an octopus trap a few years back. We're entangling dolphins in fishing line. We're doing a lot of other kinds of mining on the west coast, particularly for diamonds in the shore. So shore breaks are being messed around. Diamond mining at sea. There's increasing interest in marine phosphates, and of course hydrocarbons. And all these industries do use seismic surveying and bottom profiling at some level. And closer to home, everybody eats fish. Everybody's probably aware in this forum of things like the tasty green list, and they try and take into account these things like bycatch and overfishing and what have you. But this is our impacts on the environment through fishing are probably around here, I don't think directly, but probably amongst the largest impacts we do have. We directly are killing fish and destroying fisheries to a point where our ecosystem around South Africa has undergone significant changes.
Just saying there that overfishing is a major issue and has had a major impact, fishing in general and overfishing, particularly around our coasts. And even a lot of the activities we think of as fairly benign, like ecotourism, can have quite significant impacts, especially on smaller populations. These are some shots I've taken in Namibia, where we've done a lot of work. The industry's improved a lot over the years, but there's still quite a significant impact there. So stepping back a bit, what is a seismic survey? There's been a lot in the media about it, and a lot of it's sort of suggested, or the way it's sort of really burst out into media and social media is almost suggestive that it's never happened before, that's a new invention. And that's not the case. Seismic surveys have been around for decades, so they are in many ways an older technology. Essentially, what happens is you have a large tugboat, for want of a better word, towing behind it an array of air guns. This is what the air guns look like here on the right. And they create a big bubble. That bubble collapses, makes a big bang at incredibly loud volumes. I'm not going to get into what decibels are and how it compares to jet engines. You can't really compare sound and water to sound and air. They're referenced to a different scale. So it gets very inaccurate and dishonest, really, to try and compare these things. The sounds are incredibly loud. They are produced every 10 seconds or so, and they are focused downwards. So it's a loud bang, a very low frequency boom, kind of container dropping kind of feel to it. But as those sounds spread outwards, they tend to blur out, and they can be heard for hundreds of kilometers away. And they have been detected at times thousands of kilometers away, but in a fairly sort of muted background kind of way. The main mitigations that happen on these ships are that they're timed, so that they occur during a low whale season, usually, because most of our dolphin species are present. They try and squeeze it in around if there's any turtles or anything like that. These are taken into account in the impact assessment process. And on board, you have a series of environmental observers called passive acoustic monitors who tow a hydrophone, and they use that to detect whales or dolphins, maybe dolphins around the vessel, and also visual monitors for marine mammal observers. I've played this role in the ship. The people who play these roles are predominantly biologists by training, and the companies running these ships, in my experience, are incredibly professional people. They're doing their job, and when the MMO says stop, they stop. It's just one extra layer of health and safety, effectively, that these crew have to deal with, along with all the other rules of the sea, like not polluting and what have you. So the people involved on the ground are doing their job, and they're very professional about it. But it is an old technology, and a lot of the mitigation is focused simply on timing, and that's based largely around whales and dolphins, and very much within a sort of 500-meter zone, which is probably about this picture around animal. That's been calculated quite carefully as a zone where injury might occur. All right. Someone I can hear in the background. So if you're not aware, I've excluded the terrestrial licenses, but it looks similar on land. these are the different licenses that have been that are available around South Africa for going to prospect for oil or gas, for hydrocarbons. You have a similar setup on land. And this is the seismic surveys that have already been done around South Africa. This information is freely available through the Petroleum Agency of South Africa, right? And these yellow lines represent what they call a 2D survey. So it's a single, it's a sort of smaller array, and that should be much more loosely distributed. That you see that a single survey can cover a very large area. It's like you said, a bit of a walk around the first look. And when the oil companies discover what they think could be an area of good deposit, they'll go and do a 3D survey, which is very, very intensive. They survey literally every, like every kilometer, up, down, like mowing the lawn, so to speak, to really build up incredibly detailed picture of the ocean floor and the layers of rock and oil and gas underneath it. And these are more intensive because they're much more concentrated in a single localized area. And the next step is exploration wells. And you can see there's a lot being drilled down here where we have this is called the Kudu field. This is the active oil gas extraction area south of Mossel Bay. There were some planned off the Natal coast, which is when I first met Melissa, actually. There was a big objection to the drilling off the Natal coast. Seismic surveys around South Africa have been happening since 1967. This data was available through Stefan Schwana at PASA. He presented at the Bioacoustics conference a few years back for us. So during this time, we've seen incredible recovery from southern right whales. They've increased from a few tens of animals up to thousands of animals, and since 2009 have actually giving indications of maxing out. And so sort of on a broad stroke, seismic surveys have been happening all over and for a long period, and we're not seeing them related to massive deaths of whales or deaths of fish. So what are the concerns, and why are people so up in arms about all of this? Right? Partly it's because people are now more aware of it thanks to campaigns like this. All right. So in terms of the Shell survey of the Transkei Coast, which is this area, one of the immediate concerns was that they were conducting it under an environmental management plan that was prepared in 2013. Now 2013 in my head doesn't seem that long ago, but actually was quite a long time ago in terms of what we know about the ocean. There's been a lot of work in my field of sort of whale and dolphin research, and there's a lot of work obviously in other fields. There's been a huge marine spatial planning project that's happened around the country. You can see this map is showing some of the new marine protected areas that have been declared since 2013 around South Africa, and what are called EBSs, ecologically or biologically significant areas. These are a layer that sort of goes into the MSP process. And I think Judy Manlang is here. She was involved in this quite heavily, and I'm sure she could comment later. Also in our field, there's a thing called the IMMA, Important Marine Mammal Areas. These are sort of managed by IUCN, sorry, I've forgotten actually. There's also obviously been some benthic ROV surveys, done a lot through Scion. We've seen a lot of changes in the population. So you shouldn't be doing a survey under a very old MPA, under an EMP, and that was a major concern. So we have provided some updates on this, and what we do know essentially out of this is this coastline and a lot of other areas around South Africa are biologically unique and really important, while at the same time we still have seismic surveys and fishing and all these other things going on in the ocean. So what are the concerns about sound or noise? So sound is a physical thing. Essentially it's a pressure wave moving through a medium. Noise is a term about perception. You think of music, and one man's music, but another person's noise. And it's a field of study that's grown a lot in the last 10 to 20 years, thanks largely to sort of digital technologies making it a lot cheaper. And the impacts are really quite wide-ranging. So at the sort of broader scale, at a finer scale, you can have physiological impacts. This is essentially a stress response. There's been studies showing all these different impacts on a wide range of animals, birds and insects and mammals and fish and marine mammals, etc. Physiological impacts might be stress. So the animal might look like it's carrying on and doing its same thing, but there's an epically cool study, in my opinion, run during the shutdown of shipping post the 9/11 attacks, and they measured the stress hormones in the right whale species, and they showed that the background stress level of right whales decreased significantly during those 2 weeks where shipping happened. And we're going to see a lot of similar studies coming out of the global lockdown that happened in 2020, that really just shows that a whole bunch of wildlife is operating under high levels of stress. It you suffer from stress, you'll know that it has a lot of sort of underlying, it causes a lot of underlying issues. How you perceive the world, it makes everything a little bit harder, right? Behavioral responses are typically things like moving away from a noise source, or changing your grouping behaviors, or diving. Call masking is very important for things like marine mammals. They sing songs to attract mates or to communicate, and you can't do that in a loud crowd. If we were all speaking at the same time, you wouldn't be able to hear my voice, right? That becomes very important in the ocean. TTS is temporary threshold shifts, that sort of nightclub ear ringing. It's what happens to be very close to a sound. PTS is permanent threshold shift, or damage to hearing. Again, very important to animals that vocalize and communicate repeatedly. Death is possible. And then far more complicated, ecological impacts. If your sardine dive, and that's a small behavior, you think, meh, the sardine dive, does it really matter? But if they then become unavailable to a penguin, that perhaps it does matter. So there's been a wide range of studies on these. I'm not going to try and get into all of them. Really, there's some really good reviews that are out, and I would encourage you to read around. It's quite fascinating, some of the impacts that have been measured. But one of the problems with sound, studying sound, especially in water, and if you pause and think about it, you think about some rooms are echoey, some rooms aren't echoey. Sometimes you hear a sound from very far away, or more of the upper hill than at the bottom of the hill. This is a modeled propagation of a vessel traveling on the edge of a continental shelf, and you hear the sounds of echoes and bounces. And this creates problems because our mitigation, our marine mammal observers, they're in a little red zone. They're not able to see this kind of zone, right? And there was a very cool study done by Peter Madsen and colleagues a few years back. It shows this is the received level of sound on a sperm whale. So they had a tag with a hydrophone on it, stuck it on the back of the sperm whale, and they let the sperm whales swim around while they did controlled exposures to a seismic sound source. And you can see up in red, your very loud sounds within 2 to 4 kilometers. So some of the perceived sounds at 3-4 kilometers were significantly, were as high as the sounds right next to the source level. And quite strikingly, some of these sounds at 12 kilometers distant from the sound source were right up in a very high zone. So your MMO is not going to be picking this up, nor is even your PAM operator, I might say sperm whales there. How these animals are responding there, we don't always know. And there's a lot of the work that's been done in this field and on marine mammals has focused very much on marine mammals because they're very sound sensitive. But we know a lot less about other species in general. We really know in terms of looking at the Transkei coast here, just overlapping the various marine spatial sort of planning areas with seismic survey tracks that have happened already. We actually know very little about the species that are there in terms of fish or corals. We don't really even have a good idea about the summer distribution of some of the whale and dolphin species off this coast. The seismic survey was planned for summer when we're pretty sure humpback whales aren't there. But we actually have very little idea. There's nobody out here doing this work, particularly in the deep sea. There was an ROV survey done, published by Rio Button and colleagues, sort of from DFFE and SIAB, that was here on the continental shelf area, and they highlighted a number of critically endangered and endangered fish species that are occurring on the seabed here. And this is a study that has come out since the EMP was done. So I'm running late on time here. So talking about unknowns, I mean, I'm saying we don't know the deep ocean that well. I mean, this is a coastline that not that long ago, they discovered a coelacanth just here off the Natal coast. There are a lot of canyons, a lot of deep water habitats that we really have no idea about what's going on. I mean, that's the odd little fishy that's unusual that's living in a canyon. You're not going to miss anything major like this thing which made the news recently, 60 million nests of fish, right? It's incredible what can be found hiding in our oceans, and the impact assessments for these seismic type surveys and most deep water things do not actually require baseline surveys. A lot of it's almost exclusively based on seismic, on historic and published data, and the data I've used when I've contributed things that often relied on whaling catches from the 1960s. This is not something you get away with on land. If you want to build a windmill, you've got to go there and see what birds are there and what insects are there. You can't rely on data from the 1960s. It's actually baffling that is acceptable. And this is one of the things I want to highlight. And when you start to get into these impacts, it's really the small populations that are very vulnerable. You might not be aware of it. You've probably heard, obviously, that the African penguin's in trouble. There's been a lot of work on African penguins, our gannets, the Eastern Cape, the Bird Island group. in Alcoa Bay is one of the few areas where these populations are actually doing all right. Around our south coast of South Africa, the Gullis Bank, we have the humpback dolphin. There's fewer than 500 in South Africa, in the population that live in South Africa. In comparison, there are over 2,500 black rhinos. We have fewer than 600 Brutuswels. This is an endemic subspecies that only occurs in this area. There are other Brutuswels globally, but this species is unique behaviorally and genetically to South Africa. There's also an almost complete lack of studies in South Africa on seismic surveys. So the impact assessments are relying on very old data in some cases, or published data in all cases. There's no real on-the-ground surveys. But one of the few studies was a really nice piece of work by Lauren Pishigu and colleagues based over at NMU. And they showed, just here on the right, penguins showed a strong avoidance of their preferred foraging areas during seismic activities, foraging significantly further from the vessel when in operation, while increasing their overall foraging effort. What does it matter? For most species that we're relying on quite large extrapolations over time or area. So for a lot of the fish data for the seismic survey, saying, oh, there were some ROV surveys 200 kilometers away in KZN, so what we're pretty sure is happening here where the survey is going to happen. This is not the standard that we should be holding the industry to. And you go, so what does it matter if the penguins forage a little bit longer? Here's an example that just came out. The paper's not even out yet by Rob Simmons and Patrick Cervantes from UCT. This is actually a terrestrial study looking at black harriers, and they did a modeling study looking at windmills. So on land, there's an incredible amount of research happening around wind farms, electricity wind farms, and they estimate there's a 60 to 70% chance of black harriers going extinct in the next 75 to 100 years if simply 3 to 5 adults extra are killed by wind turbines. So this is where the vulnerability of these small populations really pops out. So just sort of summarizing quickly, I've run a bit over time. The EMPO is definitely out of date. Seismic surveys do not destroy the ocean and kill everything, but there are some very real impacts. And these sublethal impacts, like behavioral changes or changes in the prey, can really add up. And there's a huge amount we don't know in terms of what's out there, and especially in terms of change environment. There's so many studies coming out now about fish distributions changing, etc. Right? And I'm going to end it there and just say it's just one survey. I'm sure each of these mills had what are these things called? Plants had an impact assessment, and there needs to be a strategic view of what's happening out there. So I'm going to leave it there. Thanks, Ruan. This is just some exciting news from the world of oil and gas in the last year. It's just gas, nothing major. It's not as dirty as oil. I'm sure it'll be fine. I'll end it there. Thanks, Ruan.
To our third speaker of the evening, thank you very much, Melissa Groenink. Melissa, I'm just going to introduce you quickly. Melissa Groenink is an attorney at Cullinan and Associates as a senior associate. Melissa holds both a Bachelor's of Science and a Bachelor's of Law, which she achieved with distinction from Rhodes University. She's passionate about environmental law, and with a background in both science and law, she is well placed to advise clients in this field. She has extensive experience in environmental, clean energy, and planning law. And then just before Melissa starts, I'm going to ask everyone just to click to speaker view. If you go to the right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see there is a button view, and just click speaker view, and then Melissa will be on the screen, as she is not going to use a PowerPoint for this evening. Melissa, the screen and the stage is all yours. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ruan, and a very good evening to everybody. It's really good to be here with you. I must say, when we started the session this evening and Ruan, you started introducing people, I suddenly thought that you hadn't actually asked me for a bio, and I wondered what you're going to say about me. So if I can also just take a moment to update that, and just to say that I also work at Natural Justice, which is an NGO working in the legal space for community, protecting and affirming community environmental rights. And yeah, I'm still an attorney at Cullinan and Associates. So a lot of this work, I get to wear both hats, which is fantastic. Also, just seeing the presentations that have come before me, it confirmed my view that trying to put a legal presentation together would have absolutely no visual value or visual advantage for anybody here, given the beautiful images that we have seen on the last two. So hopefully this isn't too much of a dry talk just about the law, But yeah, happy to talk through it. And then if there are any questions, we can talk about that afterwards. So where I would like to just start the discussion this evening is to just take a little bit of a step back. And I know we are talking about seismic surveys this evening, and we've spoken about the impacts of seismic surveys. But seismic surveys are just one step in the push towards oil and gas exploitation. So whilst we can talk about the impacts associated with seismic surveys, on their own, let's not forget that the intention of these seismic surveys is to find commercially exploitable oil and gas reserves. And of course, there are numerous consequences that not only come in the next stage of exploration, when there's the drilling of the wells, drilling of the test wells, and then ultimately, if they do find commercially exploitable reserves through those processes, that the impact of extraction and production activities are huge. And I mean, we can look at the whole production chain thereafter. We've got the downstream refineries. And if any of you have ever been to South Durban, for example, you will see the massive impact of those refineries as well. So just having a look at the lens now, we're thinking about the Wild Coast in particular, or the West Coast, and we think of these beautiful marine environments. That also just bear in mind, this is a much broader context with infinite consequences down the road, and one we certainly can't afford in terms of climate change. Okay, so related to that, also just to draw a legal distinction between the types of rights and permits that are granted to give authorization to do seismic surveying. And we can see this distinction in the two cases that are currently in median courts. So in the Shell case, Shell holds an exploration right, which was granted back in 2014 and has been renewed a couple of times by the Department of Mineral Resources. And that exploration right gives them the right not only to do the seismic surveying, but also to do test drilling. Whereas when we're talking about the West Coast seismic surveying, that permit was granted to Seismic Searcher to do those reconnaissance of seismic survey activities only. Of course, that data is then sold to the big oil, essentially, who then may already have exploration rights or plan to acquire exploration rights over the areas and take that data further from that perspective. And this distinction is also quite important legally and in relation to the timelines that we are talking about in the different cases. So when we look back at the history of how environmental regulation of these types of activities, seismic surveying, exploration activities, all came into effect, we can draw quite a clear line in the sand between what happened prior to 2014 and what's been happening after that. And that's because in 2014, there came into effect what was called the One Environment System. Now, essentially, the One Environment System is a compromise between the environmental regulation of mineral and oil and gas activities. So, as we may know, environmental management is under the purview of the Department of Environmental Affairs, whereas oil and gas activities as well as mining activities are under the purview of the Department of Mineral Resources. So in 2014, this One Environment System essentially brought tried to bring the two systems together. So it effectively meant that environmental regulation would be in terms of the environmental laws of the country, such as the National Environmental Management Act and its EIA regulations that apply, but that this would be governed and regulated by the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. So there's already a conflict of interest when we have a look at that, and that's become quite clear in what we've seen our minister also putting out on social media, that there's clearly a vested interest in exploiting the environment. So how do we task a regulator whose mandate is, we can say that their mandate is to exploit the environment, but is also required to protect it? So that conflict arises from the get-go, and has led to a number of the issues that we are facing today, and that are being challenged in courts. Prior to 2014, there was a requirement when obtaining your exploration right or your reconnaissance permit, or any other rights in terms of the Mineral Petroleum Resources Development Act, I'll just call it the Minerals Act for now, that you were to prepare an environmental management program. Now, there's some impact assessment as related, or as part of that process, which resulted in production of this EMPR, which was then approved by the department. But these are two very different instruments, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But just before I get there, I would like to say that as our law stands, there is nothing in the law which converts these pre-2014 EMPRs into an environmental authorization. There is no transitional arrangement in any of the amendment acts which says that if you have an exploration right prior to this one environmental system, that you can later commence those activities without first getting environmental authorization. And that's really the crux of the Shell issue. So as we read the law, if you plan to commence exploration activities, including seismic activities, you must first apply for an environmental authorization, whether you held an exploration right or not. Now, in 2014, when all these changes were brought about in the legislation, there were also a number of changes to that Minerals Act, which also included specific requirements to obtain an environmental authorization. Now, we fast forward a little bit to last year, and in June 2020, so in 2014, when this one environmental system was implemented, it also resulted in the listing of mining and oil and gas activities specifically requiring an environmental authorization, which had to then go through an EIA process. Okay, reconnaissance activities weren't expressly included, but on the 11th of June 2021, there was a further amendment to those listing notices where reconnaissance activities were expressly and intentionally listed as an activity requiring environmental authorization. Now, in the searcher case, the seismic searcher holds that reconnaissance permit, and they applied for that permit prior to June 2021, but were granted the permit thereafter. So maybe also I can just mention here that there is also no transitional arrangement in our law, which says that if you applied for that reconnaissance permit prior to the change in the law in June 2021, that you weren't then required to get environmental authorization. So that's then the crux of the issue before the courts now in the seismic searcher case. We have quite a plethora, actually, of laws which protect our coastal ecosystem. So we think that the environmental law related to the land is quite complex, and so many laws and regulations and notices that we need to know. But we just add a whole nother layer of complexity when we are talking about activities occurring in the coastal environment. So we have, for example, the Integrated Coastal Management Act, which I'll talk to a little bit later. We've got the Marine Living Resources Act. We've got all the marine, maritime and shipping related laws that talk about pollution, that sort of thing. So there really is a lot of law. Now, we can also take that down to a very specific level when looking at species, and certain species are listed as being protected, such as the penguins, like Simon was talking about earlier. So we also have to consider those very species-specific laws, as well as the marine protected areas and the laws which govern marine protected areas as part of interacting with this legal system. Now, the purpose of conducting an environmental impact assessment, which authorizes activities which affect many of these coastal ecosystems, is to assess, and I'm probably talking to people who know all about this, but to assess the environmental, social, and economic impacts of these activities. This is very different to a process in terms of which an EMPR, an environmental management program, it is prepared in terms of the minerals legislation or now NEMA. So an environmental management program is a different instrument to an environmental authorization. The environmental authorization is essentially the permission document. It's a record of the decision that gives you the authority to conduct a specific activity, and it sets out the conditions in terms of which that activity may be conducted. If we look at an environmental management program, on the other hand, that is a plan to manage and rehabilitate the environmental impact as a result of that activity. So not only is the process of obtaining the environmental authorization or the process of developing that EMPR quite different, but the nature of that document is very different, and which is why we cannot have any we cannot have a precedent that tells us that an EMPR is the same as an environmental authorization, because quite simply it's not. And attempts to try and twist the law to say that it is in terms of what they are really misguided. When we look at an EIA, for example, there are different methods for assessing, as I said, and in an EIA process, you have to also consider the option of not implementing the activity and weigh those assessments and weigh those impacts between the options and between the option of not going ahead with that activity. There are also other considerations which apply in an EIA process that don't apply to an EMPR. For example, assessment of need and desirability. Now, when we're talking about seismic activities, we cannot divorce that and consider it independently of the ultimate goal of exploiting that oil or gas resource. So need and desirability, even in the context of seismic surveys, is particularly important. You also, in the EIA process, give specific consideration to uncertainties. What are the uncertainties surrounding this assessment or surrounding this activity? What are the shortcomings and the gaps in the knowledge? Now, Simon's already spoken about the significant new information that has come to light since, for example, that Shell EMPR. And an EIA process, you've got to consider what those gaps in knowledge are, or what is the latest information? Where do we not have information? So in this very deep sea environment, if we don't have enough information, then we have to consider that that's probably not the best idea to go ahead. However, that being said, even for those activities which don't specifically require an EIA process to be conducted, the principles set out in section 2 of NEMA still apply. So this is something that I think sometimes people forget, that the NEMA principles apply to all decisions which affect the environment. So this means that decisions taken in terms of other legislation, like the Minerals Act, like any other legislation relating to land, for example, are still required to take into account these various NEMA principles. So this includes, and I'm just referring now to some which are pertinent in the context of activities in the ocean environment, is that the environment is held in the public trust for the people, and the beneficial use of environmental resources must serve the public interest, and the environment must be protected as the people's common heritage. Do seismic surveys serve the public interest? I'm not sure they do. Also tells us that environmental management must place people and their needs at the forefront of its concern. The requirement for consultation and the participation of all interested and affected parties, so this includes the coastal communities on the Wild Coast and along the West Coast, must be promoted, and particularly the participation by vulnerable and disadvantaged persons must be ensured. So these are principles which apply to any decision, okay, and includes a decision to renew, for example, the 2014 decision to grant Shell the exploration right. Decisions also need to take into account the interests, needs, and values of all interested and affected parties, including recognizing all forms of knowledge, including traditional knowledge. Okay, so these decisions to grant seismic permits and rights for exploration activities and seismic surveys are required to recognize other forms of knowledge, traditional knowledge, which might be held within these communities. We must take into account that the use and exploitation of non-renewable natural resources must be responsible and equitable, and take into account the consequences of the depletion of the resource. I've yet to see this included in an EMPR. And of course, the well-known precautionary principle, which in NEMA is set out as requiring a risk-averse and cautious approach, which takes into account the limits of current knowledge about the consequences of decisions and actions. So if we don't know enough, we need to take a step back. And until we know, we cannot authorize activities which can have potentially majorly significant impacts on the ocean environment, on communities along the coastline, if we don't have the knowledge which tells us it's okay to do so. Then perhaps a lesser known law that we have in our arsenal in this case is the National Environmental Management Integrated Coastal Management Act. That's a newer law than NEMA, but it specifically promotes an ecocentric approach to decision-making on environmental, on coastal activities. So it tells us that an organ of state that is legally responsible for controlling or managing any activities in our coastal waters must control and manage that activity in the interest of the whole community. Now, people are part of that whole community, but so are each of the organisms. And there's a definition in NIMICMA which tells us that the interest of the whole community means the collective interest of the community, which includes adopting a long-term perspective that takes into account the interest of future generations, a coastal environment that is characterized by healthy and productive ecosystems and economic activities that are ecologically and socially sustainable. It's also taken into account the interests of other living organisms that are dependent on the coastal environment. So there's a very specific mandate under this act that the regulators and decision makers must take into account the whole community, including people, including organisms, and the impact on the ecosystem, including people as a whole. I haven't seen the Integrated Coastal Management Act specifically considered in any of these assessments. Okay, and this is really a fundamental flaw, not only in the assessment process, but in the decision-making process. So the question then is how do we enforce, or how do we challenge these decisions? Or how do we challenge activities which have these detrimental impacts on our coastal environment? So where we're saying that seismic surveys are being conducted unlawfully, or where seismic surveys have been subject to assessments that haven't considered everything that they need to in order to make an informed decision. So there's a few administrative avenues that can be followed. So where a decision is made, if there is an EIA process and an environmental authorization is granted, then NEMA provides for appeal processes. Thereafter, you can approach the courts, as is being done in many of these cases. But we also have Section 28 of NEMA, which is a duty of care provision. And when there is pollution or potential significant pollution of the environment, then in this case, unfortunately, because it is oil and gas activities, then the Minister's Department can be approached to take certain action. Of course, also under the Minerals Act, there's provisions to suspend an activity, to suspend a decision. So, for example, to grant an exploration right or reconnaissance permit, pending the outcome of the appeal. And we've seen already in the cases that, these mechanisms have been, tried. They've tried to use them in these cases, but the authorities just haven't stood up. They haven't taken the action that they need to take in order to protect the interests of the environment and of the coastal communities. So I think I will stop at this point. Thank you.
Thank you to all of the presenters. It's been fantastic. I'll just echo everyone else's comments. This one's for Sinegugu, please. I really loved your presentation. Thank you, Sinegugu. One thing I'm struggling with here in the UK is how we change our values. Your presentation hit on all the things I think most of us value in terms of the value of the landscape and our culture, and you didn't really mention money once. Whereas most of the decision making we're talking about that drives oil exploration and all the damaging practices we see is, of course, money. How do we collectively start to tap into different values so that we measure things in a different way and perhaps drive our decision making in a different way? I know it's a bit of a difficult question to ask and probably even harder to answer, but it's about how we change our values. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Sorry.
Yes, yeah, no, thank you, thanks Andy, and thanks also for ongoing, for your support for a long time from the other end. Okay, I think there's a lot that one could actually say, but of course there was the time factor that we need to consider given the fact that we are 3 speakers. But there are many angles because one, we need not to look at the money alone because we may not live by the money alone. There are some of, if for instance, we were to say, we evaluate even the value of the livelihoods, look at how many people are dependent on the ocean for livelihood and be able to, government doesn't care, they do not look into those particular things. But if we were to evaluate that and try and do the economics of the people, we'll actually find that it's worth billions per year, but no one talks about those things because government is very concerned about how much money they will make, they will bring into the tax basket, the central government. But we also need to bring in, there's the climate change factor. If we are looking into, if we are serious about the sustainability of life into this planet, we have to remember that we only have one planet and that planet is reaching the tipping point. And we need to be able to say livelihood are more important than the money and the profiteering, which is what is driving government. It's also driving share. There is more to life on this planet than making profit, which is what is driving the government and what is driving share. So, and no matter how big the oil and the gas reserves will be, they will never be able to compensate for the livelihood that people derive from the ocean. So in other words, when you look from all angles, whether it's the climate change, whether it is the economics, whether it is from the livelihood perspective, there is not a convincing rationale about why globally these multinational corporations are now going for exploration for oil and gas. So it doesn't make sense for us at this point in time. So the question of still wanting to make profit despite everything else which is at stake is very concerning. And unfortunately, politicians choose to sleep in the same blanket with the corporates because politicians also are standing to actually to make. Yes, we need to follow where the money goes. We need to be looking at the shareholders of these companies. We need to be bringing them to account. We need to be challenging them, and because it is morally wrong, it is ethically wrong for us. When all of these countries, all of these corporates, they are the ones who attend the UNFCCC, and they realize that we have reached planetary limits. We need to cut down on carbon emission, on fossil fuels and all of that. For us, that's concerning. More concerning because as people in rural areas who are dependent on natural resources for our livelihood, we are already being hard hit by climate change now. Our livestock getting sick, in terms of the rate of extinction of the marine reserves, the biodiversity within the ocean, but also of in terms of the disruption in climate and the storms, severe storms that we get with destroying the crops and all of that. We are already, and no one talks about that. All they're concerned about is how much money they would make. So our Minister of Minerals constantly insulting the public for opposing this, because they are saying they are doing this in order to bring economic growth and all of that. But that economic growth, who is it going to benefit? A minority of shareholders, of people who are shareholders to that exploit. So there's a lot at stake. Thank you.
And our identities, well, particularly with your culture, something we're missing in the West. But I think that cultural value as well is there as well. I'll shut up. Thank you ever so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Andy, thank you very much for that question. And Sinegugu, thank you very much for that very, very thought-provoking answer. Judy, please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you very much. Thanks for a very interesting series of talks. My question is for Melissa. Melissa, with all of your knowledge and experience on the legal side, if you had to give us as environmentalists one piece of advice when we tackle issues like that, what would be that advice, please?
Thanks, Judy. And is that from the perspective of evaluating the impacts or challenging those decisions?
That would be from the perspective of challenging decisions that have been made.
Okay, so yeah, here I think we can also, I'll talk to the answer in from Alexa, which was about creating a legal precedent from the current cases, is that although they are reasonably, challenging, each of these decisions is often quite specific to the facts and the timing. For example, with these transitional arrangements and changes in the law, the impact is not only around those specific legal questions, but the more difficult it is to get away with trying to skirt around environmental issues or not properly assessing impacts, the more difficult it is for a lot of these big oil to come and do these activities in our waters. So one, it's about getting people to know about it, that should have known about it, understanding who should have known about it. So there's been, with both of these cases, there's been such a great public campaign. So it's not, there's such a huge public interest in it. And that in fact came out in the first Shell judgment when the court said, the public interest in this is palpable. We can feel it. And that comes through in these judgments. So get involved in the campaigns, get the word out there. The bigger the campaign, maybe the more interesting tweets we might get from our minister, but certainly those can have an impact on the cases before the court as well. So yeah, get involved, spread the word, and one of the important aspects of the cases that we've had is the expert evidence. So if you are an expert in these fields, don't be shy when, to come out and tell the world about your expertise. It can be so important, for these cases, and often it's quite difficult to find experts that are willing. So yeah, I would just encourage people to use the expertise that they have, whether it's legal, whether it's environmental, whatever it is. So I hope I didn't go on too much of a tangent there, Judy.
Thank you, Melissa. Ruan, am I missing any questions in the chat at the moment? But I see Marty is at the Wild Coast, it seems to me. Marty, you've raised your hand. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Well, thanks, guys, for the talk. The question I wanted to ask Simon, and I kind of got a sense that a lot of the propaganda and media and all that almost has blown some things dishonestly out of proportion, which, you know, is also not good. But at the same time, I think it is still a problem, what's going on. So how bad is the actual problem to the animals or to the marine life? I think often we try to anthropomorphize, or whatever that word is, these things. You imagine the noise going on in your house every so many seconds and things like that, and I just can't imagine that it is conducive for life, for marine creatures. And I do get what you say. It's unlikely to be killing them, and, you know, thousands of beachings and things. But I still think it's, you know, it is a bad thing that's going on. From what we're also hearing, a lot of these animals or marine creatures have exceptionally sensitive hearing because of the way they communicate and whatever. So it's, you know, like dogs have amazing hearing. Is it true that these marine creatures do also have very advanced and sensitive hearing?
Yeah, hi Marty, thanks. I think I'm going to take that as a compliment that my views were balanced enough. You don't know where I stand. Yes, it is a bad thing, is the short answer in most ways. There is indeed a huge amount of energy and noise going into the water from seismic surveys, but a lot of other sound sources, shipping, pile driving, drilling, all these type of things. But the ocean is also a very noisy place. So in many ways, marine animals are fairly used to loud noises, especially those living in the Antarctic or the Arctic. Ice, earthquakes, wind noise, these things all actually make huge amounts of low frequency rumbling background noises. And another weird one, which actually came out the other day or a few years back, was that if you actually pause and think about how loud the ocean was when it was full of whales, it was an incredibly noisy place. We're now picking up, if you go drop a hydrophone off the east coast of South Africa during the whale migration, it is non-stop whale song. Back when we had 200,000 blue whales, those things were competing in some ways with that. So you kind of have these weird mixes of, yeah, we're used to loud sounds, or animals that are potentially used to loud sounds, but they're not used to that sound. So it becomes very complicated. I think what for me has been the biggest issue is that there's a huge number of unknowns in terms of what is happening on the ocean floor. So most of the write-up that you see when the oil companies respond and say, oh, there's been no impact and no strandings, it's all kind of focused around whale strandings. And that's not really, I think it's been shown fairly conclusively that although seismic surveys do impact whales and dolphins, and at several levels, from behavioral and physiological up to potential injury, what has been overlooked massively is the impact on sort of potentially benthic fish. And we don't have local studies. We barely even know what's down there in our deeper waters. But there are also some weird ones in that often some of the impacts, so final point of this is that a lot of the impacts are like sort of concerns from fishermen who are worried that a seismic survey will cause a fish to, say, dive more. And there have been behavioral responses like that shown, or fish will come off the bottom so they can't be trawled. And so, the impact on the outside, fishermen are concerned about the impacts. But they're not concerned for the health of the fish. They're concerned that the fish will not be there so they can be killed. So in situations like that, you might actually end up with a net positive effect, but we don't know. And sometimes it's unlikely to have a net positive effect on the environment, because say those fish do move off the bottom and they're trawled less, they're then potentially also unavailable for other predators. So it's an incredibly complicated system. But I think the short answer is, if there are positive effects of putting that much sound into the environment, they're probably quite niche. So I think the fairly conclusively, its negative impacts is the net result.
Yeah, so I mean, I think kind of the view is that while maybe it's unknown what the impact is, don't do the impact not knowing what's going to do, rather try and find out. And I mean, I understand that takes a lot of research and costs and all of those kinds of things, but it's I think the old sort of mindset and worldview on things was, let's not do too much harm, as opposed to let's actually try and improve the situation, because harm had been done in the past. A lot of, without those marine protected areas, those fish species and sea mammals, etc., were in trouble. And now we've actually got marine protected areas that are conserving or promoting their life, and it just seems quite dire. But I don't want to be an alarmist or anything like that, but it doesn't sound great.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's certainly a bigger picture issue is really where these things need to be tackled, and that's what I think Melissa's insights have been really good.
Thanks, Marty. Thank you, Simon. So perhaps a rhetorical question in the chat from Alexa is a larger question that is looming in the background is, should we be in surveying if we do not want to invest in oil and gas? However, the alternate question is, we do not invest in oil and gas, what is our energy production outlook? So yeah, difficult questions to deal with, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't deal with them. Marty, do you have another question? I see your hand is up. We kind of expect you to ask another question by now.
I think if I might add, if anyone at this particular point in time have an opinion or something to add to Alexa Prinsloo's question that Johan just read, by all means, put up your hand if any one of our speakers have anything to add. But I think that it's a very broad question. So I just wanted to add, if anyone in the audience has something to say, you are more than welcome to voice your opinion. Thank you, Johan, and everyone.
Thanks, Ron. Andy? I see your hand.
Yeah, I can't claim any expertise particularly, but I have looked through the International Energy Association, the IEA's report, and their proposed pathway to net zero by 2050. And one of the they're talking about, shift from oil and gas and coal to renewables. And one of the headlines in that is that there is no need for new oil and gas exploration and development. We've got sufficient reserves if we're serious about reaching net zero and keeping in 1.5 degrees with the risk that entails. So that's the the IEA were the guys who sort of set quotas and the prices back in the day. So they've changed their tune. I think that's a significant comment from them. I think that report came out late last year. So there's justification from within the oil and gas industry at the top level, saying we don't need to keep exploiting and developing new stuff. Obviously, there are business interests that counter that. That's all I can add there.
Andy, thank you very much for that contribution. We have a question from Paris. Please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, can you see me? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, I'm having some hiccups today. Hi, everybody. I have a question for Melissa. But before I ask that question, I just wanted to point out or make a statement. I think we're in the UK. We're part of Rise Up Earth, and we're helping on our side. I think some of the things that we're also looking into here is the EU regulations. There's a bit of a tug of war going on with let's just call it the climate agenda at the moment within the EU. There's good news and there's not so good news. I think it's important for everybody to pay attention, because as we know, a majority of these companies that are operating in Africa, not just in South Africa, but all over Africa, are foreign companies. and they have to adhere to the EU protocols. Even the Australian-based companies, if they are to trade in the European Union. Like I said, I'm not going to go into detail at the moment, but the information is quite easy to get online. And if anybody would like any specific information, then by all means, contact me or Sinegugu. The question I have is for Melissa, pertaining to the Paris Agreement. We know that Shell lost in the Netherlands, and we've been doing some research here and looking into how they won, how they lost, and what were the criteria, and how we can actually fight and hold these companies accountable here in international courts. We're based in the UK, like I mentioned before, and it doesn't look likely that what's happening here in the UK with the government is that a lot of these corporations are moving here because we don't have the tight legislation to protect the environment, which is one of the things that we're going to be campaigning for quite heavily this year. And that is to bring the Paris Agreement or part of the Paris Agreement into UK legislation. I've got a piece of paper here somewhere. The dates that I have for South Africa is that something called the Climate Change Bill that was tabled last year in September 2021. Is there any progress with regards to South Africa actually adopting any of the Paris Agreement laws into legislation? Do we need it? Because I know we have a really strong legislative constitution ourselves. And looking into what the UK is doing right now, they're operating on the Climate Change Act, which is from 2008, which is outdated. Even though they signed the Paris Accord, they haven't gone ahead with bringing that into legislation, so it hasn't been voted into in the Houses of Parliament. Whilst, if we look at the Dutch government, in 2019, they actually took on board the Paris Agreement and brought that into law. And that is, if I'm not mistaken, one of the key strong points of why they lost in the Netherlands, and why they were also the judge was able to prosecute them and say, well, you have this is what you have to achieve, 45% reduction in your CO2 emissions, specifically to Shell. So my question is pertaining to the international standpoint of our constitution, South Africa, and whether this is something that we can look into, or whether this is even necessary from an international perspective, Melissa, or anybody else for that matter who would like to comment. Thank you.
Sure, and I'm sure there's people with some specific comments on that, but I'll just start it off by saying that I do think that our existing laws are strong enough for those similar types of challenges, but that the climate change bill is long overdue. I mean, the draft last year was essentially a revised draft of another bill from many years ago. And one of the sort of the issues with the climate change bill is that it still requires action thereafter. So once we have it in effect, we still then need government to develop plans and to go on like that. So we do have good environmental legislation in the country. We've also got the Air Quality Act, which gives effect to from an emissions perspective, certainly gives effect to climate change imperatives. Whether it's strict enough and tight enough, that's a different question. But I really do think between our right in Section 24 of the Constitution, together with Section 28 of NEMA, for example, relating to the duty of care, we do have good law that we can utilize. And it's a question of how it's put into practice by our politicians, by our department authorities that are regulating these aspects, and ultimately how the court will also interpret those provisions, and whether they will interpret it strictly in light of those commitments under Paris agreements and other international laws, which we do think there is sufficient scope within our legislation to do that.
Thanks, Melissa. Thanks, Paris. Thank you for the question and a very comprehensive answer. Anybody else? the floor is open for another question. Ruan, am I perhaps missing a question in the chat at the moment?
Not at all. I would just like to point everyone to a comment, I'm going to call it, for the lack of a better word at this particular moment in time, that Sibylle Rietmüller made, a very long one on the stance of South African banks, especially Standard Bank. She placed it in the chat section at around 5 minutes past 8. And there's a link to it with Standard Bank and the rest of South Africa's banks' involvement in as financiers of such exploration and development. So please go and have a look at that. It's not so much a question as a link to more information. Thank you very much, Sibylle, and all of your other comments with regards to the crabs, and just saying thank you. Let's just see the last one.
Did you have your hand up? You are welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question or make another comment.
Maybe, may I just to add to my comments? I mean, it's well known that one of the most economically unviable energy sources is oil and gas. Now, they've been being subsidized worldwide by governments to about $5 billion a year, which is only direct subsidies. It does not consider all the collaterals to human health through pollution, to biodiversity damage, and all other damage. There's a link I shared about a video, which is excellent, which is quoting IMF reports, which have put figures to the damages done by oil and gas exploration, which go into the trillions per year. This is a calculation of the cost, which makes indeed oil and gas sources of energy unviable economically. So once this stops, the subsidizing of these energies, all the rest would be hugely favored in terms of investment and also viability. So the question that we cannot afford to leave oil and gas or fossil fuels is totally, I mean, it's basically based on ignorance of the real situation. And of course, all this is strongly linked to politics. We have a battle going on in Europe at the moment, as you may have heard. At New Year's Eve, the European Commission has published a so-called taxonomy of the green energy gas sources, which taxonomy is a term which basically lists the energy sources which will be considered as green in the future, to allow for investment by funds and banks, etc., etc. And of course, there's been a deal made between the present government of France and the former, and also I have to admit, present government of Germany, that nuclear energy and gas has been included. Of course, you know that France has bases its energy sources to, I think, about 70% on nuclear energy, and Germany has this heavy reliance on gas from Russia, which has been basically now created by the Nord Stream pipeline, which is about to be finished, not yet. And there's of course a battle going on in Germany now, because in Germany we have decided to quit nuclear energy by end of this year, and this is terminal. I mean, the population is strongly behind it. And there's also a strong movement to get out of the Nord Stream, because of we don't want to have this reliance on Russia for quite obvious reasons. So things are at the moment highly controversial in Germany, and luckily we have the Greens in the government, of course not the majority, but one of the partners. And so there's a lot of campaigning and pressure going on, and this year will be very interesting. Just to add this.
Thank you, Sibylle.
Thank you.
Alistair,
just before we get to Alistair, sorry for again interrupting you. I'm just going to have to say goodbye and thank you very much to Simon. He unfortunately needs to leave the discussion. Simon, thank you very, very much for being here and adding your valuable knowledge. and all of the years of research to the talk tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here tonight. So if everyone can give Simon an extra round of applause, then we'll say goodbye and good evening. Thank you very much, Simon.
Good. Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, everybody, for having me on. Hope that was helpful. Good night, all.
Thanks, Simon. Good night. Goodbye.
Alistair, please go for it.
Thanks, Johan. Okay, so my question, I think, is more directed at Melissa. I've got a background in environmental compliance, but generally post-decision compliance. And the big issue is we've got some fantastic law in this country, but generally I think we get to a point where it's a box-ticking exercise at the end of the day. And just to tack on to what Sabila was saying now about the energy mandates, I don't think that our renewables that are on offer to us globally are a solution to our energy issues. So I'm certainly not for gas or for nuclear, but I do think that we haven't found a solution to what we actually need to be doing in terms of if we want power and all those sort of things. But generally, my question to or my comment to Melissa is that we sit with an issue with some fantastic legislation, and it seems as if now, I was reading an article just now, it seems as if Minister Creasy is now in the process of taking the voice away from communities, and only EAPs will be allowed to appeal certain decisions being made on an environmental front. So just a general comment on that, and the situation that we sit with a box ticking exercise with some fantastic legislation that backs our boxes. Thanks.
Yeah, certainly. And I think, one of the issues that we face, and particularly around consultation requirements, is that often these application processes and EIA processes do the bare minimum to tick those boxes. Whereas, the law doesn't require that minimum compliance. But the only way that is often challenged is if there is an appetite, funding and resources to be able to challenge those decisions, even and often through the court process. So, I mean, we've had some good judgments in the courts that do have a wider impact. But yeah, Alistair, I do agree that compliance is an issue, minimum requirements. And, I think a lot of it also comes down to this extremely competitive bidding process that is involved in particularly these big EIA processes. So more than going above the minimum is an expensive process. And in order to get the job, you need to bid less. So I do think it is a big problem. And unfortunately, it does often rely on civil society to challenge those actions. So it is a flaw in the system. It is unfortunately the way it stands at the moment.
Thanks, Melissa. Paris, you've got your hand up again. Please go ahead.
Hi, I wanted to ask if the links could also be emailed to us. I'm not sure if you would be sending the recording via email, but would you be able to send all the links through? I've made some screenshots, but if that's possible, it would be appreciated. And Melissa, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm interested to read the climate bill that's now been tabled in South Africa, because I'd like to compare it to the agreement with the Paris Agreement that South Africa has signed. But I'm interested to know more about what's tabled with the future of the South African legislation with regards to the Climate Change Act. And also, what I wanted to ask was the investment, I think it's $3.1 billion, if I'm not mistaken, that has been provided to South Africa for its transition. Do we know where exactly this money is coming from, and do we know what the criteria is for this? I find it a bit odd that if we don't have an actual climate bill or a climate change act in legislation at the moment, that we're getting all this money. How is this being regulated? And it's difficult to find this information, so don't worry if it's not possible to answer. I understand. I'm struggling to find it myself, so I'd really appreciate any advice you can offer. Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, Paris. And I'm afraid I don't have the answer for that. There might be somebody else on this call, and I'm also wondering if my colleague on this call might have a better idea.
Thanks, Paris. Thank you, Melissa. I just want to give Enrico an opportunity to ask a question, please. Enrico, you can unmute yourself.
I'm trying. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, another question for Melissa. Out of now, I was thinking while she was making a fantastic talk, by the way. So now there is, for example, the new fishery right allocation process happening, and because of budget cuts and lots of other issues, there is clear evidence that basically the enforcement around fisheries, commercial fisheries, is not up to standard. Could the precautionary principle of the NEMA come into play to say, basically to say, unless you guys sorted out a way to control the process, the precautionary should be waited until you are able to control the process? I don't know whether I explain myself clearly.
Yeah, I think with the allocation of fishing rights, it's a very complicated issue, which is not only the law but policy, but customary rights, commercial interests. Yeah, so where the precautionary principle would come in there, I'm not sure how it would rank in relation to all of these other considerations. I'm not sure either. But I think certainly the small scale fishers are the ones most struggling with these quotas.